Well, howdy, y'all. I'm Chairwoman Brooke Paup. I was of the Texas Water Development Board, but as of 2 weeks ago, I am now at TCEQ. I am really delighted that my old agency still allowed me to moderate this panel, because I'm not saying I have a favorite panel, because this conference is amazing, but this is really an extraordinary panel, y'all. If you want to hear what the best and brightest the state of Texas for economic development are thinking, this is the right place. The thing that I've been asked the most since being here is, what's so different about your new role at TCEQ? There's a lot. There's a lot. Back at the board, I was kind of like Santa. You know, we went around and gave money and loans and grants out to political subdivisions, and Kelly, no offense, we're kind of like the Grinch, because we give enforcement orders and fines and all the things. But really delighted that the governor picked me for that role. I have 2 teenagers now, so the mother of dragons, so regulatory does not scare me, really. But with that, let me introduce my esteemed panel. We'll go to Robert Allen, Fort Worth Economic Development Partnership, one of my dearest friends in the world and absolutely brilliant human being. He is doing things for Fort Worth that they've only dreamed of, and I'm so very proud of him. Mr. Scott Norman with the Builders. We talk often. We have many things in common, and we work very well together, especially in the regulatory scheme. Alia Vinson, ABHR, brilliant. And Zach Rosenbaum, PE, so you're Mr. Engineer of Samsung. And when I tell you I had to go through hoops to get this man up on stage, I had to go through hoops. Like, it was trying to get the president on stage. He probably has Secret Service around here, the Samsung Secret Service around here, making sure that he is safe. That's right. Whip us into shape. Yes, whip you into shape. So I'd just like to have a really great, candid discussion on what is going on with growth and economic development, with water infrastructure in the state of Texas. Nothing is off limits. Let's just talk and see where it leads us, and then we'll have some really great audience questions. Does that work for everyone? Yeah? All right. Well, let's get this party started. Well, I'm going to start with a big old question. So Texas is now, God, this is driving me crazy, y'all. Is this driving y'all crazy? Yeah? Can someone, hold on.
He's coming with a handheld.
Just unmic me. All right. All right, they've undressed me. So Texas is the 8th largest economy in the world, soon to be 7th. Is that right, Robert?
That's the rumor.
According to the governor. And we are growing by 1,300 citizens a day. That is a day in the great state of Texas. Not a single one of those citizens is bringing a drop of water with them. How is that impacting your sectors, and what are the biggest challenges right now? We will start with Mr. Allen.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be with all y'all. I think you talk about challenges as it relates to water, and if you're like me, before I got into this business, you have to really remind yourself that it is a challenge. I think that's part of the issue of this. You're all experts in this space. I was not until I started working for the governor and ultimately doing economic development. We have experiences in life, right? Maybe a freeze where all of a sudden you flip the switch, lights don't come on, you turn the faucet, the water doesn't come out. Well, then all of a sudden it becomes real. If your daily life is unimpacted, you may not think much about it. So I always start with that it is a challenge, and we all have to acknowledge it as such, because these growth numbers that we're talking about are Texas-sized and showing no signs of slowing down. So when, in our case, we have individuals that come talk to us about our region, Fort Worth, Tarrant County, the surrounding region, which is one of the fastest growing regions in the fastest growing state, Texas.
Oh, I think you just surpassed Austin for fastest growing.
Also true, I was telling Scott, like, you got to be careful with that one. Some people are like, awesome, good job, and other people are like, I don't like you. So that cuts both ways, but that is true. Fourth largest city in Texas, and again, showing no signs of slowing down. So when you see large water projects, you have to take a moment and you have to slow down and say, okay, what do we have to talk about here? Who are the key partners that we have to bring in? We'll talk about those in a little bit. Some of them are in the room today. And then you have to really be strategic, thoughtful, and analytical about the project. That's not to say we don't want it. I get that question a lot. Oh, does that mean you don't want it? No. It just means that you've got to be really thoughtful about it and go to the experts who are looking at infrastructure in the next 10, 15, 20, 25 years in Fort Worth, because I don't have that level of awareness. So I have to go find people that do. We have great partners that help us. And so that's just on its face, some of the challenges and how you maybe mitigate those with massive population growth that's in front of us.
Well, you have to pay for it too, so that's a big deal. But you have your partners like Tarrant Regional who are in the audience that have, just hold it normal. I'm sorry about this, IT guys. Tarrant Regional, who has been a great partner with Fort Worth, that has helped make a lot of water come true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your
I would
great
just
region.
flag it. He hates it when I do this. Dan Buman, who runs TRWD, he's a rock star. He is my doppelganger, by the way. We share the same barber. So you call Dan, you call his team, and you say, guys, I need a little bit of advice on this. How does this fit into the big picture? How does this fit into the overall plan? Can we do it? A lot of my colleagues and friends aren't used to asking that question. It's Texas, right? We can just do it. We'll do it. We ask, can we do it? Should we do it? And then you progress the conversation further than that. But you can't do it without people like Dan and his team.
Yeah, he's amazing. The whole Tarrant Regional team is incredible. So Scott, let's talk about development and what you are experiencing with the fastest growing state in the United States.
That's right. Well, for over 200 years, people have been coming to Texas for a number of reasons, but blessed with natural resources, opportunity, available cheap land, and our population's been on an exponential curve since day one, really. But what we're seeing now, as you said, 1,300 a day, or put another way, a city, bigger than Corpus Christi every year appearing on the map if they were all in the same place, if you think about it like that. Huh. And our members, we have about 10,000 members in our association, home builders, remodelers, developers. They're in the business, really, if you think about it, of building bedrooms for all these people to sleep at night, and building homes. And all those homes take water, and like so much in construction and development right now, the cost inputs that drive the cost of housing are through the roof. And water, like cheap land, historically was one of those things that was taken for granted. And now in almost all of the state, not everywhere, but the vast majority of the state, that's not the case anymore. As is the same with available cheap land. And so it is factoring into the decisions. Water is going to be the top, or at least the top 3 impediments to the continued growth from the housing sector, because you don't have to be. I'm not a builder. I've played one on TV before, but if the toilets don't flush and water doesn't come out of the faucet, the houses don't sell very well. And so it is something that is front of mind for our association, and looking forward to continuing policy debates to push that forward, so we can continue to house all of these people that are in Texas or want to be Texans as fast as they can.
Well, we are providing the American dream for a lot of people coming from out of state. So trying to find land and homes and schools and water for them is a huge struggle right now. But come to Texas and we will provide a miracle for you. Alia.
All right, it's hard to follow that, Brooke, but I'll work on it. So I would say that I think it's tremendously important seeing the growth that we're generally seeing in the state, but especially kind of in the triangle of the major large cities, the Metroplex, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin, if you look at that triangle. And I think many of you attended the state demographer presentation earlier today, and I will tell you the number in my head about how many people were showing up every day, He blew it out of the water. I mean, he said it was 1,542 people a day.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay,
so,
I need to update my numbers.
you know, it's even more accelerated than I think we have been thinking about in our own minds. But one of the things that we're experiencing, I represent a lot of water districts, water providers. I also represent a lot of land developers. And that's the need to really plan into this growth and not wait for it to be upon you. We've definitely seen a number of examples where perhaps where areas do not want that growth, but the growth is coming. And I will tell you, it's coming whether you want it or not. And the negative results that have occurred in some instances are moratoriums on building homes. So you have land developers who've purchased land, home builders who are building houses, people who are wanting to move into them because they have come to the region and they need to find reasonably priced housing. And when the water plants and water facilities have not been constructed to meet the pace that's needed, along with the wastewater, of course, then you can't complete the construction. You can't allow people to move in. And so I think we have enough examples of sort of failures to plan resulting in moratoriums, and that really is a result that that is problematic for everyone, and it creates a huge economic development problem as well for the state.
No, that's absolutely worst case scenario. I know that in Arizona they had a beautiful development that was by Scottsdale that was virtually abandoned for a while because there was a complete lack of water. And that is Scottsdale, Arizona, which, if y'all know, is a very high wealth area. And if they can't find the water, that's a big deal. And that is exactly what we do not want to happen in the state of Texas. So Zach, let's talk about Samsung.
There you go.
All right, let's talk about your industry and how water comes in to play.
Yeah. Well, so semiconductor industry is overall, it takes a lot of water to make a chip. And so the tagline we always use is that we make water so clean, it'll kill you if you drink it. And I brought some today. I'm just kidding. So that's usually the tagline that we bring in, because number one, it makes it super interesting, but it takes a lot of water. And so I think companies like Samsung, and really I would say every major manufacturer, understands that when it takes a lot of water to do that, you have a very big challenge and you have a very, very big responsibility to be a good steward. And so if we're talking, when we're talking about making sure that there's water, you're going to have to work with who, if you're going to choose site selection for a location, you got to make sure that all of the resources are available. You got power, you have natural gas, and that you have water, and that you're going to be able to treat that water to be able to use it, because you have to make unbelievably clean water, and all the time, 24/7, 365, regardless of the scenario. So
you talked about being a good steward once you are in a site. How is Samsung doing that? How are you working with the public to ensure that our water supply is plentiful, or working with locals to?
Yeah, so I would kind of, Samsung, we have a plant in Austin and we have a plant in Taylor that's, under construction. In Taylor, the benefit that we have is we're able to build from the ground up in a greenfield scenario a near ZLD reclaim plant. So we are near zero liquid discharge as the design criteria, and that's something that basically can continue to increase our reclaim over time. So we basically get to build in 40 years worth of improvements that we've made at plants in the Korea and the US, which is a huge benefit there. The other thing is, in Austin, we get our water from Austin Water. We have a very close relationship with Austin Water, and we look to continue to really make sure that we're on the same roadmap, even if it comes to operational issues and in forward-looking, where we're headed, where they're headed, and ensuring we're on the same page, and then working to find ways to improve that. And so in an older factory, you're looking for a lot of different solutions and different ways to. It's a different challenge to go find different ways to make improvements in the treatment. But we know that we have to continue to find ways to use less and less water as we continue forward.
No, it's quite costly, conservation and trying to upgrade facilities, but worthwhile to y'all.
For sure, and I would say Samsung has set really big goals for our sustainability, 20, 30, 40, and 50 goals. And so that's the benefit. Generally, semiconductor is the most challenging manufacturing that exists, I would argue, and that bodes the same for the utility side as well. And so they've set really big goals, which is a very high Samsung value, and semiconductor as a whole does that. And so I think we've set the big goals, and then we basically have to go figure out how to make it happen in the meantime, and that requires a good partnership. It requires good partnership with design companies, with building a clear roadmap for how you get there, which is super challenging with the level of goals that we set as a company. But it is valued from the top of the company down to the engineers and technicians on the ground floor. So
That's great. When at my previous job at the board, we talked about the value of water every day. The cost of water, the true cost of water, the cost of water if you don't have it, which is catastrophic to the state. How do we balance economic development with the cost of water? How are we right-sizing water for the state of Texas? So, Robert, your job, and you're very good at it, is to attract businesses, companies to come to Fort Worth for that American dream, that Texas miracle we've talked about. But infrastructure is expensive and it's necessary. So how do you balance bringing in different sectors with paying for this infrastructure that we so need, almost proactively?
Yeah. Well, I think it starts with thoughtful growth, strategic growth. We talk about that a lot. We use those words in Fort Worth a lot. And what does that really mean in practice? Well, again, it means when you see an RFP in our case, and you start seeing some of the numbers on the project, specifically in this case, maybe the water usage that's projected, I always ask people, is that true? Don't just assume, is that true? Where are we going to get it? Who's going to pay for it? Can the infrastructure at the location or in the building that they may be looking at capable of handling that? And then obviously if the answer is yes, okay. If the answer is no, what does it take to upgrade? Who covers that expense? And most importantly, in our case, if you're going to talk about that, then we always kind of then look at the surrounding region around that facility. So that may not be impacted directly by the project, but we always kind of scan out and we say, okay, with our city planning partners, with our water partners, what's happening in the region immediately around it? Because if we're going to drop a huge user in, how's that going to impact neighbors? How's that going to impact? And then again, who's going to pay for that infrastructure? So on and so forth. And so we try to look at things on the nose, as we say, with the specifics of the project, but also then take a step back and look at it holistically, regionally, around what's happening in that particular area of the city in our case, and then talk to those that are in that planning pipeline and process, pardon the pun, but it's true. And we say, okay, if the company says they need X, they say it's going to cost Y. Again, is that true? We ask a lot of questions. Is that true? Who bears the burden of that cost? And then is there a better way to do it? And again, that's why we try to look at it holistically, because we say, if we're planning something here, but then we know that we're planning something very, very large close by, but the public doesn't know that, is there an ability to do something on a project timeline that could save us cost, that could reduce an expense for somebody who is ultimately going to bear that cost? Because at the end of the day, there are no free meals, right? And so that's how we try to tackle that. And then when you get into the actual dollars and cents of it all, it's very, very complex spreadsheets in our case, probably most people's cases. Who's going to cover what, when they're going to cover it, and then that's a whole nother ball of wax of making sure that we're delivering on those timelines. And then again, that it fits in with the bigger picture. Again, I come back to TRWD in our case. They supply roughly 2.2 million people with raw water. City of Fort Worth gets their water from TRWD. So if we're talking about adding a big user, we need to make sure that that is sustainable long term and that there aren't any surprise expenses to that. Just like you don't want a house that faucets don't come on. My clients don't want to get to the end of the runway on a year or two project and all of a sudden have me go, oh, by the way, I missed this $2.5 million little hickey here. I'm so sorry. You're not going to have water until you pay that. That's a problem, and obviously something you want to avoid.
Yeah, that's worst case scenario for y'all.
That's right.
As well. Well, Scott, so let's talk with developers. The value of water, obviously, incredibly important when you're putting a development of, what's an average development now in the state of
Depends
Texas?
on where you are, but there's 2,000-3,000 lot subdivisions. There's houses, there's developments that are 20-year pipeline of multiple sections. It could be any size, but whether you're building 10-acre ranchettes or you're building 50-foot wide 1,300 square foot houses, they all need water, and in fact the consumption from a residential use is about the same if there's 2.5 people living in every house or whatever. But that being said, not to get into land use debates, but like the building blocks of economic development, whether you're Samsung or some other corporation looking to relocate, that may be looking at educated workforce, transportation, tax breaks, whatever. Housing historically is something, as I said earlier, that we took for granted in Texas, that it was low cost. And that's something that I think economic development planners took for granted. And I think now you're seeing businesses step up, and the economic development world realize that's another building block that we have to have. And part of that affordable housing puzzle is making sure there is a water supply for that and making sure there is adequate. And so I don't see us as in competition with industrial heavy water users or whatever. They have to have a workforce living somewhere, hopefully proximate to the facility, and are in houses that they can afford to live in. And so it is a factor, and it is getting more expensive. And not all of the development you were talking about west of I-35, there's a lot of areas out there that maybe have reached, maybe not there yet, but they're approaching peak sustainable capacity for the locally available water supply. When you think about the Ogallala depleting or whatever, if you're out far west Texas. And so we have been and are continuing and are encouraged by Senator Perry and others talking about moving water uphill. I grew up in Deep East Texas. We have lots of water. Obviously, that's a thorny political thing on taking water from East Texas and moving it to far west Texas. But this isn't just the Texas Triangle. It's all over the state. There's areas, and whether you're a town of 800 or you're a town of 8 million in the area, we've got to address those. And it's going to take the government working with the private sector, the state, local governments. A lot of the water systems and water supply that we enjoy all over the state were funded publicly going back 40s, 50s, 60s, building reservoirs, doing all those sorts of things. And that's just going to have to continue, but it's going to have to be in a different way, and it's going to involve moving water around to make it happen, and reuse and other things in conservation.
Now, not to get on my soapbox, but water is the most important issue facing the state, period. I would say power is second. Water you literally have to have, or you'll die if you're a human. So I'd say water is the most important. This session is going to be a water session. I'm very excited to see what comes of it. I'm hoping for a very large investment into water to my chairwoman here, Chairwoman Stepney, who will invest it and ensure that it is properly used. But when the state water plan has a capital cost of $81 billion, we added another billion a month ago, $81 billion, and your main pot of funds was a SWIFT account that had $2 billion that was invested in 2013. You are woefully behind on investing in infrastructure. So it is time for the legislature to reevaluate and decide where that money really needs to go. And I would frankly love to see a permanent revenue source coming to water in some form or the other, not my choice, but it's time, because if you want to attract the Samsungs of the world to the state of Texas, the thought of having a permanent source to fund water infrastructure is very attractive and important and necessary. I want my kids, and I want your kids and my grandkids to have the same economic opportunities that we've had, and we can't have those unless we have water. Alia, Houston is, a special child with water. Do you want to talk about some of the water issues that you were dealing with?
Well, I'm happy to. I would say one of the things about the Houston region is, you either have too much or not enough, and of course, in the spirit of One Water, in the Houston region, we are often dealing with the flood aspect of water, which is a particular challenge. But one of the things that I would say is that we're seeing tremendous growth, especially in the suburban ring around Houston, and so it presents some interesting challenges on the water supply front. I would say that due to the vision of the city of Houston many decades ago, we have the benefit of very good water supply in terms of quantity. That being said, it's not always where you need it, right? And so as you're trying to move that water from where it is, say, in the Trinity River on the east side over to really fast-growing areas on the west side, not only are you needing to make sure that you have treatment capacity, which has generated some exceptionally expensive water treatment plants that TWDB has provided a lot of assistance for, so we certainly appreciate that, but also massive transmission lines. So in our area, we are dealing with 40-mile long, 96-inch diameter pipelines crossing town, bringing water from the City of Houston's water supply assets over to West and North Harris counties, over to North Fort Bend counties, and that is really large-scale infrastructure to move that water from where it is to where it needs to go. And I think that sometimes when we say, is there enough water, we're really just talking about water supply. Do we have enough water in the river? And that's one piece of the puzzle, but making sure that we have water treatment capacity, water transmission capacity, that's really, really important as well. One thing I also want to mention, because I think this is an area that we do struggle with in Houston, and I'm sure many other areas of the state are dealing with the same thing, and that is existing infrastructure that's aging, water plants that are needing rehabilitation, lines that are leaking and causing tremendous water loss. And so it's not only about creating new water infrastructure, but taking care of what you have. And I think there has been more attention recently at the state level, especially last session, about the idea of aging infrastructure and taking care of that. I know the focus last session was primarily on rural. What I would say to you is that there's a tremendous need for that across the state in urban and suburban areas as well. And I do hope that we will see some added attention to that in this coming session.
No, I think that's a great point. The state of Texas has been hit with a double whammy with water issues. So we need that future water supply. That is incredibly important when you're growing by 1,458.
Right, it was, I wrote it down. So the demographer said 1,542.
Oh my goodness. Okay, 1,500 citizens a day. You need that future water supply. You've got to plan for growth. You've got to be proactive with that. But you also have aging infrastructure that you must take care of. You can't just start from scratch at every single city. You need to build upon the infrastructure you have, and that takes investment, and that also takes political buy-in from the cities and towns. They have to be ready and willing to raise rates, which is not sexy. No one likes to talk about it. No one likes to talk about rates at all. It's, what's that song? We don't talk about Bruno. That I have kids. We don't talk about water rates. It's kind of like that, but it is incredibly important because you have to right-size your infrastructure and you have to pay for your infrastructure, and water is not free. I know everyone assumes it's free, and toilets are not free. They have to flush, they have to go somewhere. So water rates are part of that discussion that are going to be coming up much more in future years. So I will get off my soapbox now. With Samsung, what have y'all done to ensure that the value of water is captured? What are your innovations?
So I think, we definitely understand on a per wafer, we make a wafer. We know on a per wafer basis how much water we use for certain.
How large is a wafer?
So in the majority of the major manufacturers now is all 12-inch manufacturing. So the wafer is 12 inches, and so you have anywhere from 100 to a few thousand chips on that 12-inch wafer.
How much water does it take to make a chip or a wafer?
I wouldn't be able to give you the exact amount, but there is an amount of water that we use. We don't end up sharing that completely, but we keep track of it internally.
Give me all your trade secrets.
Very similarly to the reason why it was very difficult for me to show up. We also don't like to share the specific
The
details
Samsung
of
police are coming.
That's right.
now.
There's somebody tracking
So
me.
let's
that
just
would
say
be,
that it takes a decent amount of water
Right.
to produce your product.
That's right. Because if you think about it, you're putting it's a lot of chemical intensive process. There's a lot of cleaning. That water is used for mixing, and so because you need really, really clean chemical, and you need to make sure it stays clean as you're diluting that chemical down to whatever amount it needs for that process, and then you need to clean the wafer off. And so there's just a lot of that happening over a 90-day cycle of, it takes 90 days to make a chip, basically. And so it's a very long process. It takes a lot. So I think the key thing is that you're making water that'll kill you if you drink it. There's a lot of steps in that process. And so at every single step, we're looking for ways that we can pull off that stream, whether it's the primary or the reject stream, and reuse that in the plant. And so we have tons of reuse just in our production where we are able to reuse that water and use it internally to the system. And so that's going to happen all the way through. The cheapest water is water you've already bought. Of course, we want to reuse that, and at any point. And the other thing is when that water goes into the fab tools, the best thing, the cheapest water treatment is piping, and we want to segregate that so that all of the chemistries stay together so that you can then treat those individually. We don't want to combine them together as much as we can help it. We want to be able to keep the chemistry separate so that we can then treat and reuse that water even more so. And so we're basically looking for ways throughout, kind of the entire process to make sure that we have everything segregated at the tools, and that we have everything, that we are finding every piece of efficiency that we can throughout the process to be able to get the most out of that water.
So you are absolutely incentivized to save every drop of water you can.
Every drop. I mean, part of the thing is every drop of water we save, even strictly financial, we especially for what we have, it ends up being easier to put it into financial terms for the kind of the engineering teams that we have. But every drop of water you save the treatment cost that went into it, the treatment cost when it's leaving. We don't have to get the water from Austin Water. We don't have to treat the water, have Austin Water then treat the water. There's a ton of savings involved in that, strictly from a dollars and cents standpoint. Not to mention the environmental improvement, obviously, of we want to use as little water as possible to make those chips.
Yeah, conservation is very important. And
For sure.
The private sector is actually led on conservation. We had to change our demand estimates. Was that right? Demand? Yes. 2 or 3 years ago, because the amount of water needed by manufacturers went down, because the private sector is leading in conservation, which is great. Private sector sees the need to save money and save water, and they just did it on their own, which is great, because in Texas, we don't like to be told what to do. And I'm learning that because I am now part of a regulatory agency. I'm learning that the hard way. But with Scott, talking about regulatory in water and development, what are you seeing this session that is interesting to you?
Well, this session, obviously big picture on the water supply side and trying to generate new sources of water, or as Alia said, move water around the state. I think that conversation, I'm older than everybody sitting up here, and a lot of y'all in this room, has been going on at the Capitol for decades and decades, going back to the drought record in the 50s, but I worked in the Capitol in the middle and late 90s. It was around Senate Bill 1 times, and it was those same conversations, interbasin transfers, we're going to move water, there's going to be this huge water market, and they thought it was right over the horizon. Here we are 30 years later, and it hadn't really happened. There's a few examples here and there around the state, but certainly not what people were envisioning. And so I give credit. I mentioned Senator Perry and others, and now the governor and lieutenant governor and Speaker Burrows and Speaker Phelan before him. We're all talking about, and Joe Strauss, we're all talking about water because they recognize what you were talking about. And so but it's a higher level than it's been in a long time. Certainly, I would say, since going back to 97 and 99 Senate Bill 1 and Senate Bill 2 times, it's as high a level of discussion as I've seen politically. And so that's a good thing. Now, does that, a lot of times there's a lot of talk across the street at the Capitol. Does that always result in action? Maybe not so much, but we certainly hope so. So we're optimistic. But it's not just on the state level. It's the local level and understanding, just like the early pioneer settlers to builders and developers and economic development folks and industry took it for granted, and it was maybe available for minimal spending in years gone by. That's not the case anymore. Generating new water or moving water around is going to be much more expensive. You were saying nobody wants to pay for it. They're used to low water and wastewater rates. I don't think that dynamic is realistic if Texas is going to continue to grow, and the next 100 years is like the last 100 years has been for this state. And so it's going to take, I talked about a partnership on all levels. You mentioned incentives versus mandates. It's a huge deal. For our industry, you're talking about Texans. Certainly builders and developers do not like mandates because mandates go right to the bottom line on driving the cost of housing. And almost everything we do at the regulatory level, local, state, and national, is about trying to keep that affordability factor or that attainability factor as low as possible. Because the greatest demand is for the lowest price point housing. That is what our members want to put on the ground more than any other, is the lower, whether you call it missing middle, whether you call it workforce housing, entry-level housing, what have you. And it is the hardest to get on the ground. And it's because land's expensive, all the inputs are expensive, labor and everything else. The regulatory environment, primarily on the local level, not the state, but there is some state and federal, obviously. But water is becoming an ever-increasing factor in that. So we've got to try to come up with ways of incentivizing reuse, incentivizing creative stormwater and retention, making some of that more development-wide versus individual house. I think your returns and the economies of scale on doing something, especially if it's a medium or large master plan community, are more realistic on a gray water system that's plumbed for the whole entire neighborhood versus on a onesie-twosie house-to-house deal. So there's companies, some of those are coming to see us and visiting with our members from across the country that are really getting into this discussion. State of Florida recently passed density bonuses for builders and developers who voluntarily implemented some of these water or wastewater savings mechanisms into their projects. And so there's those kind of things that are out there. I think you could see maybe something we've been talking about is impact fee credits. Local governments often charge impact fees for water and wastewater and transportation and drainage. But there's nothing in the law that gives or recognizes or incents builders and developers to install these things. They're still having to pay the full impact fee, even if you could demonstrate that your usage per unit is down or whatever. And so the legislature's got to be thoughtful. Policymakers need to be thoughtful to try to get some of that, because I think that would result in change. And then they can make an economic decision. Okay, I'll spend a little more on this, but I'm going to save over here and try to keep that housing cost low.
Well, Senator Perry has created the new Water Supply for Texas Fund last session, and that is primarily to fund innovative water strategies such as desalination, produced water, ASR. I think that's it. 3. That list might open up. I don't know. But those innovative water strategies are incredibly important because we need every tool in the toolbox in the state of Texas. So reservoirs, not sexy, still need them. ASR, it's like a savings account for our water. Brackish desalination, absolutely necessary, especially when we are sitting on as much brackish groundwater as we are. But all of that takes investment, and it takes political will too. The city of Liberty Hill has a reuse project, which is one of the most innovative reuse projects in the state. But it is new, and it was tough to get done, but they still managed to get it done just through sheer political will, because they need the water, because the cost of not having that water in Liberty Hill, a fast-growing area, was incredibly necessary. What are y'all seeing as far as innovation goes and the willingness to go beyond the normal, just the normal groundwater or wells, and try different things and invest in different things?
Sure, I'm happy to talk a little bit about what we're seeing. To a certain degree, you are seeing the market at work, right?
Yeah.
You are seeing developments learn the awareness that the water rates are raising, that they want to adjust for that. And so we're seeing a lot of developments building purple pipe, either for effluent reuse, for highly treated wastewater that can then be used for non-potable irrigation, but also, and I think this is exceptionally useful in areas where rain is plentiful, to try to capture, when there is a rain event in a detention pond, to capture that water, to use that for irrigation. So I think there's tremendous opportunity for non-potable irrigation from both of those sources. That being said, it's significantly more cost efficient when you do that at the beginning of a development. When you're retrofitting that, it is significantly more expensive. And so I think that if there is a hope for more retrofits, I think that you would want to see some incentives to really encourage that to happen, because the costs are very high. But I think that we're seeing that play out in real life scenarios, and it really makes a difference. And one thing I will say is that the more you shave off the irrigation usage in the summer so that you're not using your potable water supplies, the less you're building your water plants and your transmission lines and everything else for peak usage, right? That only comes part of the year. So if you can shave down your peak, it can really allow your potable water supplies, your facilities, to last longer before you need to expand. So there's a real benefit to the entire system.
Great. Scott, what innovative water strategies are developers looking towards?
Well, I think what Alia was referring to, adversity and the shortage is going to drive innovation.
Yeah.
And financial hardship. They're going to be financial decisions. We've seen it, as I was talking about, on the reuse side, whether that be reusing effluent, which is, I think, the easiest to do. Potable reuse is a challenge. There's health concerns and that sort of thing. When you get into construction, and the engineers in here will know, on the wastewater side, you need a certain amount of flow to keep your plumbing system working and your sewer system working for the city. And so going to full home reuse is not realistic either. I think one of the things, though, is going to be, I think, more and more partnerships between our industry and local governments on the water side. It used to be way down the list of things they worried about because they assumed it would be there. Also, with the legislative changes in cities and annexation and ETJ, the historical model of cities growing and expanding their system out and growing is changing. And so you're going to have special districts. You're going to have other water supply corporations and other entities in the unincorporated areas of the state that are growing, where a lot of this growing is, because these large subdivisions, for the most part, are going to come in on greenfield growth. I mean, they are large master plan communities. They're going to move the cows out, and they're going to bring in and put in the streets and the lots. And
Those poor cows. Those poor cows.
well,
Except in Fort Worth, we keep the cows.
yeah, that's right.
You have
We're good with
longhorns.
that.
Yes.
I think, don't you get a cow with every house
Yeah,
when you
it's
move
something
to
like
Fort
that,
Worth?
yeah.
But
It's a mandate in Fort Worth.
yeah, that's the reality. And I was talking about dense subdivision development. That's the only way you can really get mass scale affordable housing on the ground. Is smaller lots to build smaller houses. It's unrealistic to put everybody on a 10-acre lot to build small housing because it's prohibitively expensive. The land costs have gotten too expensive in these ring cities and ring areas around the big cities. And so we're going to have to continue to push that. And it's also going to be region-wide collaborations is what it's going to take, whether that be city or councils of governments or what have you, or regional water suppliers and those sorts of things. But you said it earlier, the putting the head in the sand or closing the gate, saying I have my piece of the pie, no one else needs to move this town, city, county, neighborhood, whatever, is not realistic. These people are here. It's not the builder's fault they're moving here. It's not the developer's fault. They're responding to the people that are moving here. And all of those jobs have to sleep somewhere at night. And so that's what our folks are in the business of doing. And so we have to make sure that happens.
Yeah, I think the era of not worrying about infrastructure or water is over. For the state of Texas, we had that luxury for a while, and it's time to really get serious and invest into our infrastructure. And with that, I've got a hook that's telling me I need to go to Q&A, otherwise someone is going to. Okay, we have 2 mics ready to go. If anyone would like to ask questions of this esteemed panel, yes, sir. Oh.
Mark Friesenheim from Comal. Yeah, Mark Friesenheim from Comal County. My question is to you, Brooke. You mentioned permits for the housing industry. Could you explain that a little bit more?
Well, I think that there's an issue with ensuring that there is enough water available before developments go in, and it's not a permitting thing. It is more of a water availability issue. I know last session there was a bill that was passed that really looks to ensure that there is enough groundwater available for developments before they go in. So I think being proactive in ensuring that we know what we have.
Yeah. That was for wells that are serving those lots.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The expert will weigh in. Yep.
I'm limited on the total understanding, but Texas Administrative Code requires housing developers to certify 20 years of water, something like that. But there's no cumulative assessment. Secondly, there's no certification for the other major industries. So we're ending up in a situation where we don't know how much water our big industries are demanding for the future. That's a problem in my mind. Scott, could you comment on that?
Well, I don't represent the industries that these guys do, but as far as for single family or for residential, yeah, there's been a law in the books for 20 years. It was optional to the counties. Last session, it was made mandatory that they certify that. There's a few exceptions if you're over some of the Gulf Coast aquifers in any East Texas where there's a lot of water, but or for very small, I think it was 10 lots or less subdivisions. But it's not the builders have to certify, it's the professional engineers in the room and elsewhere have to certify.
Well, and I will say we have a
It has to get done though.
We have a state water plan that is
That's right.
released every 5 years that has our needs for municipal use, what we think we will need in the future, and we plan for that. And we have 16 regional water planning groups that have their projects in the state water plan, and the state provides incentivized capital for those projects to be built. So we are trying to get ahead of that growth by incentivizing the building of this infrastructure. But the state water plan is pretty dynamic, and we change it every 5 years. So take a look at it. It really does keep up with the growth. What next? Come on, you got Samsung up here. You can ask him some questions that you shouldn't ask.
Are y'all seeing, as people move in, are they asking the question, is there enough water? As businesses come to you, Robert, are they concerned? Are they showing concern that, hey, we're not sure there's enough water in Texas, we're having concerns? Samsung, are you seeing the same thing? Or are you not getting the question? I'm just trying to get the feel for, we talk about it all the time. We have a feel for what the growth is. But what's the message for people that are coming to Texas or looking to expand?
I'll take first stab at that. I think culturally, all of us assume there's water everywhere. You go in the bathroom at this hotel, you think there's water. And I think that's what people assume. And I think to Brooke's point, it's why the political challenge that policymakers face of getting the public to agree to pay for it, whether that be increased rates, paying back bonded debt, whatever, increased property taxes, whatever it is a challenge because people just assume there's water. It's just like the built environment. We talk about it all the time, whether you're in your house or in this beautiful hotel. Most people don't think about how there was nothing here, or there was actually something here, part of the university, but that house was not. It was built by a bunch of people outside in the elements by natural materials, and they don't think about that. most people do not. Everybody in this room I know does. And so I think that's a constant education thing that we have to do. And those of you that are in the water business, I know some of y'all do a really good job of trying to educate people, but I think it's unrealistic to expect the public to really get into that debate, because water, like the lights are going to turn on, water's going to come out of the sink. It's just something that everyone's grown up and think it's there. And so I think the challenge is probably unrealistic, but it's going to take politicians to lead on this and make hard decisions that we're going to have to spend money on this.
Well, Scott, let me plug the statewide awareness campaign that the Water Development Board has been tasked, has been so helpfully tasked to do. The Texas Water Foundation is taking the lead on that, and it is a $10 million awareness campaign that includes $5 million for educational awareness, but I'm expecting great things. We're expecting legendary things from the Texas Water Foundation to let the public know what the value of water is. So expect to see that roll out in the near future, but it is going to be one for the books.
I think, and that's a great point, because I think we collectively as society have done a great job of educating, going back to the Indian chief standing on the bank of the dirty river and the trash, those of you that are old enough to remember those commercials, to conservation groups and environmental groups, talking about clean water for the environment and protecting the bays and estuaries and creeks and streams and all that. I think the public gets that. But on the water supply side, I think that's where it's going to take a similar, multi-year education thing to get that.
Dan, I'll just, two quick, I heard two questions. One, do they ask? And two, are they concerned, or do they express concerns? In my case, they only ask if it's critical for them, for their business. So point one. Point two, on the concern side, no. That has not been commonplace in my business and what we're doing. I think Scott's absolutely right. I think as we go through this, and everybody in this room has a role to play in your worlds, in your respective businesses, whatever role you play, and that is to raise the awareness of water in your particular areas. And we talk about it in economic development all the time. You think that there's just a small group of people that are making decisions on these things. The reality is going to be it's going to take all of us to raise the awareness, raise the issue. Creative solutions come out of that awareness. Companies do their part to get creative and keep every drop of water. By the way, we've got a lot of folks that we talk to on projects that are like, guys, it's extremely expensive for us to waste water. And so it is not in their best interest to do so. So they come up with solutions on their own. So they only ask if it's critical. And no, don't hear the concern. But obviously it's our job to get in front of that. And obviously we all have a role to play there.
I believe there was a question over there.
Okay, this one's maybe a little more challenging, or maybe you don't want to answer, but Scott, and also the Samsung question. But we talk about water is very cheap. Everyone wants it to be cheaper. It's getting more expensive. But how does Texas compare in cost for development on the home side or on the industry side for these costs that are having to be increased for getting water supplies here? And are you seeing folks not move forward on projects simply because of the cost of this infrastructure?
You go first.
Yeah, I'll go first. I think, semiconductor, a plant is extremely expensive. And so I would say water is expensive, but in the cost of, when we have a $17 billion plant we're building in Taylor and the $19 billion that we've invested in Austin, the cost of the water, or even the water infrastructure, even if we have to pay to build it, is not the biggest thing. When you have a photolithography piece of equipment that costs $250 million each, that's going to be, you're going to have, those costs add up quickly. And so it definitely, I would say, it is definitely a major factor, but it's not it is a major factor in primarily the concern, to at least the question from earlier. I know that the level of the Highland Lakes, and if there is ever an article that comes out that is about drought or the level or concern about water, I have questions from Korea that come in the next day. Almost guaranteed, like clockwork. We are very dialed in because we understand that it's an unbelievably vital resource, and having a consistent supply of water is foundational to, we shut down. We can't run without, we don't last long at all without water. So we're very, very tied into it operationally.
Yeah, and similarly on the residential development side, are there projects that don't happen because you can't get water? Absolutely, or it's cost prohibitive to get it, and that factors into the land cost. I mean, like the inputs on a plant, a lot of these subdivisions, the land's getting sold thousands of dollars a square foot, not by the acre, and so and all of that drives the housing cost, and so getting, it's a binary decision. Can I get water and sewer supply to this project? Can we do drainage? And so that certainly affects it. But you have more choices maybe than Samsung does on where to locate subdivisions. But our members, it certainly is factored in, and there's deals that are not happening. But that being said, with 1,538 is our new number. It was 1,000 for 15 years. We've just been saying 1,000 a day, whatever it is. Those people are going to be here, and they are all going to use, that minimal, or they're going to average out that water usage. But it is a component that is an ever-increasing factor, and will even become more so as it becomes more scarce.
Yeah, and if I could just add on to that, I think that what you're seeing is that as you have all of these additional infrastructure costs, you are seeing housing prices go up, right? So there are some deals that don't make because of this, but in most cases you can find a way, but it's going to be more expensive. And I would say you really have 3 different levels of impact on an individual. There's the cost of the house itself and their mortgage payment. There's the cost of their tax bill. And as the costs are higher, there's going to be a higher tax rate longer, or a need to increase taxes. And then there's the utility bill. And the utility bill is going to be a bigger part of their budget than they typically would have seen maybe in the past. And so I think when you look at all of those things together, you see that tremendous pressure that we're seeing in this state with growth and the attainability of housing being more and more difficult for people to reach.
Oh, that's very well said. Are there any questions over here before we conclude?
One in the middle there.
Oh,
This one's for Zach, please. Zach, I believe you said something early on about a near zero discharge, if I heard that phrase right. The last we had heard, the new plant in Taylor, the Samsung plant, would be about 75% reuse. Has that percentage increased recently?
Well, I guess the characterization is it's designed to be near ZLD, near zero liquid discharge, and so we expect that the number will increase over time. I think our published, initial number is 60%, but we expect that increases over time as we get further into operation.
Yeah, I'm Larry Patterson with the Upper Trinity Regional Water District. We show up on a lot of the charts there. And I've got a question really relates more to the development community. I've been working on the Lake Project for 22 years. And so what we need to do is to better use what we have, because it takes so long to develop water supply projects. So what we see is 5,000 or 6,000 homes come in at a time. The developments are built rapidly. And so I'm wondering what the development community is doing related to coordinated landscape ordinances with these different cities so they don't compete against each other, or developments, as well as the irrigation folks. They set the irrigation systems up, and they water every day, maybe twice a day. Early on, you can go to Texas A&M, and they'll tell you you don't need to do that, at least after the first 6 weeks or so. So what are you doing as a development community to educate these new folks and or encourage and support the cities to have education and outreach programs that would just slow the growth down, knock the peak off of it, allow us time to catch up? And that's not just something being experienced in the North Texas area, it's across the state.
Right. Well, one of the things I would say is that I think there's a lot of room for wholesale water providers to